Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Rod Milam.
Sometimes I would read one of these and just kind of stare at my screen for a while and think maybe I was losing my mind.
So people are looking at documents thinking, where was I when these happened?
It was definitely surreal.
Newly released records and uncovered documents reveal that for 75 years, the United States government downplayed and ignored the risks of radioactive waste in the St. Louis area. The Missouri Independent, Muck Rock, and the Associated Press spent months combing through thousands of pages of records that show radioactive waste was known to pose a threat to people living near Coldwater Creek in North St. Louis County as early as 1949. However, federal officials repeatedly wrote potential risk off as slight, minimal, or even low level. The risk of waste at Lambert Airport and in Hazelwood, Weldon Spring, and Bridgeton was also downplayed. Joining me now to discuss this is Allison Kite. She's a reporter for the Missouri Independent and is the author of the large investigation on this subject. Allison, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, radioactive contamination in St. Louis, it's been really reported on extensively by yourself and other journalists for many, many years, and this joint investigation came to a different conclusion. What did you find out in this investigation?
Sure. So I think the big takeaway from this investigation was just how early and how often the federal government was aware that the contamination was spreading into Coldwater Creek, posed a risk to residents of the St. Louis area, and how many opportunities they had to intervene much earlier and save a lot of people from getting exposed to this and potentially getting sick.
So let's go back about 70 plus years to World War II, and this is pretty much when the story started. The government was trying to produce a nuclear bomb for the Manhattan Project. What was St. Louis's part in this particular effort?
Sure. St. Louis played a pivotal role in the development of the first atomic bomb. Mallinckrodt Chemical Works refined uranium for the Manhattan Project in downtown. The uranium from Mallinckrodt was used in the first sustained nuclear chain reaction in Chicago, and that was a key breakthrough in the development of the bomb. And so, I think while heavily linked with the production of the bomb, it wouldn't have happened if not for those efforts in St. Louis.
Okay, so we missed a little bit of what you said, but I think what it boiled down to was that a lot of the heavy lifting and the first major chain reaction of the uranium for the Manhattan Project was actually completed here in St. Louis. Is that correct? Did I understand some of the backgrounder?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry about that. I think
that wasn't
internet
you.
cut out for a second.
Don't worry about that. So when the project concluded, the remains of the toxic materials that started off that whole portion of the project that was started by Mallinckrodt here in St. Louis, the toxic material that was left over was moved around a lot of different times in the St. Louis area. Can you tell us about the journey of some of that waste? Where were they moved?
Sure. So immediately after the war, a lot of that material was stored at the St. Louis airport. And that's where it was, first posed a threat to Coldwater Creek from steel drums that were deteriorating, that contained radioactive residue placed right near the creek. Eventually, the federal government sold the material to a private company. The idea was that private company could refine the waste further to extract valuable metals like nickel, cobalt, copper, and then the company would dispose of the waste. So from the airport, some of the waste remained at the airport, but a good chunk of it was moved to Hazelwood, to a site on Laddie Avenue that also backs up to Coldwater Creek and was another means through which the creek became contaminated. It was there for a number of years. A company called the Cotter Corporation, who was not the original buyer of the waste. It changed hands a couple times, but dried a good deal of the waste and shipped it to its site in Colorado. And then the leftover waste that was not valuable to the Cotter Corporation was taken in truckloads to the Westlake landfill and dumped there in 1973. That's how the landfill got contaminated. Laddie Avenue remained contaminated after the Cotter Corporation's work was done for a number of years. And so that's kind of how the waste got spread to all these different sites.
Now, why did it end up getting spread across so many different sites and across the whole region?
So I think what it boils down to is the federal government was, trying to dispose of this waste by, kind of shifting it off to a private company. The idea, we had a document where the Atomic Energy Commission was discussing the potential sale, and they said something along the lines of, this will allow us to get rid of these 100,000 tons of waste at the airport without spending any money. And which is, kind of wild to reflect back on now that we are decades into these cleanup efforts and millions upon millions of dollars are going to be necessary to get all of these sites remediated.
And how early did they know that there was a potential problem with the waste that was stored?
Yeah, so the earliest that we saw was 1949. It was an internal memo within the Mallinckrodt Company where they were talking about these deteriorating steel drums sitting at the airport right next to the banks of Coldwater Creek. And they were kind of discussing this trade-off between, do we pose a risk to workers and have them repackage this material? And they decided, no, that would be too risky and, a far worse consequence than the potential of contaminating the stream. It's not quite clear. Obviously, that memo eventually landed in the hands of the federal government because it was revealed through a Freedom of Information Act request. It's not clear exactly when the federal government got its hands on that, but then there was also a draft survey that the Department of Energy had in the late 70s that showed dangerous levels of these contaminants making their way into Coldwater Creek from the airport site. So, somewhere in between 1949 and the 70s, the federal government became aware, but Mallinckrodt had this memo and knew as early as 1949.
And since we're talking about documents, I think it's a very good time to bring in our other guests that we have here in studio. I'd like to welcome the co-founder of the group Just Moms STL. That is the activist Dawn Chapman. Dawn, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like to talk about your role in this particular investigation that was just released. You work closely with Kay Dre, who is a longtime environmental activist here in the state of Missouri, and she gave you binders full of documents about radioactive sites all around St. Louis County and asked if you wanted to read them. Now, do you know where these documents came from?
So we were told by her that they came from a FOIA request. She does her own FOIA requests sometimes, and other people do them. And Kay has always been, for decades, just a living, breathing library of documents and information on these sites. So, but what was particular about the binders is when they were compiling this in chronological order, there were some documents in there that they hadn't seen before, that, she hadn't seen, that some of the people that are working with her that have been, closely. And we knew all along from the 10 years that I've been doing this that there were holes in the story. Mm-hmm. And so, and it was very clear from just glancing at the binders and flipping through a few pages, there was a lot of stuff that I had never seen before. And I thought, wow, we have something here.
So you were saying there are an awful lot of documents that were there, maybe too much for you to deal with on your own. What did you decide to do with them once you started getting just volumes and volumes and volumes of information?
So my other co-founder, Karen Nickel, and I, we actually read them. discussed a plan that she would read one binder and she would pass it to me and I would read it, and we wouldn't discuss it until I had finished. And then we would get together, go over that binder, highlight it, talk about what was in it, and then move on to the next. So we had a process that we had, and we went through and read all 15,000 pages and just sat back and were stunned and had a good cry.
So what compelled you to, because you eventually passed on these documents to Allison and her team, what compelled you to do that?
Well, just as Allison pointed out and their investigation showed, there was just a timeline that started to appear as we were reading them of when the federal government knew and when they didn't, and how this waste changed hands, and really the thought process behind the Department of Energy, which to us did not appear to be about protecting people, but so much as getting this waste off of their hands and not being the sole entity responsible for it, because they knew it was harmful and could be hurting people. So, and we don't have the ability to do what Allison and her team did, which is really investigate it and come in with fresh eyes. Mm-hmm. Because I will tell you, I feel like my family's been harmed by this. That does, to some extent, make me biased. Mm-hmm. We needed people that had not read about this before and really understood it to take a fresh look, and that's just what they did.
And how and why did you choose Allison and her team in order to do this?
So we had been following the Missouri Independent and Allison for some time, watching, the stories they did. And we actually had a journalism professor, that we were speaking with, and she suggested Muck Rock and the Missouri Independent. So we reached out, and, it didn't take us long to start feeling comfortable, because right away, what they wanted to do made sense, and it's what needed to happen. We knew that they had the ability to do what they just did. And I remember the day we handed off the thumb drive, I just felt like I was handing over my newborn baby.
Mm-hmm. And Allison, what was it like for you on your end to be, handed this certain amount of information that had just been released about this very large and long-going radioactive subject, and what's been in the hiding and the cover-up behind it?
Yeah, I think whenever somebody, puts their faith in you to tell a story that's really important to them, that's a high honor. So, I was obviously very appreciative that Dawn and Karen trusted us to go through these documents and tell this story. And then, as I started to go through and annotate them, I, would just come across a document and read it, like the 1949 memo where the Mallinckrodt knew that these deteriorating steel drums could result in nuclear waste contaminating Coldwater Creek. And, sometimes I would read one of these and just kind of stare at my screen for a while. And think maybe I was losing my mind, that I wasn't really reading this. So it was definitely surreal to go through these thousands of pages covering, the entire history of these sites.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll get back to more about reading these actual documents in just a bit. You're listening to St. Louis on the Air here on St. Louis Public Radio. And now back to our conversation about local radioactive waste contamination from the World War II atomic era with Allison Kite, who is a reporter with the Missouri Independent, and Dawn Chapman, who is co-founder of the group Just Moms STL. Thank you very much, both of you, for staying with us, and to the audience as well. Now, we talked about Mallinckrodt Chemical Works' role that happened in this entire process. The company knew about potential runoff into a nearby creek as early as 1949, if I'm not mistaken. But it wasn't until 1976 that a survey commissioned by the federal government confirmed dangerous levels of contamination in Coldwater Creek itself. Now, Allison, what else did this survey determine?
So I think the big takeaway from the survey is that this waste that was sitting at the airport was not contained. The levels obviously are going to rise over time if you've got wastewater or stormwater runoff carrying this waste into the creek. So I think the big takeaway was that if something wasn't done, this waste was going to continue to get into the creek, and it did.
And was there something about the level of the contamination, and what did some of the folks who knew more about the levels of the contamination, what did they have to say about that as well?
So we didn't get detailed answers on that from the Department of Energy. We talked to, some independent experts who said these levels were not safe for humans to be exposed to. The survey didn't include discussion of the levels beyond, summarizing them on the part of the federal government, but we did run these by some folks who said, yeah, this should have been a red flag.
And was there anything that was done as a result of the report back then in '76?
It doesn't seem so. The airport remained contaminated for years to come after that. In the 1980s, there was kind of an acute situation of a bunch of severe runoff all at once from the site. So, this stuff was allowed to continue to threaten the creek for years.
And Dawn, this entire issue is really personal from you, and just even talking about it, I can see it on your face. Was it difficult waiting for this entire investigation to wrap up?
It was so difficult waiting for this to come out, and I think it's like you're waiting for the truth, and it's going to come out, but it's going to hurt people. I think the most important thing to look at right now and to understand is that there are people alive who know where they were back then with the timestamps on these reports. So they can look at these reports that Allison's talking about and say, oh my God, I was playing across the street on that ball field right across from the airport, like 20 feet from the airport's waste. I thought that was a junkyard. That wasn't a junkyard. That was nuclear waste. I mean, you have people doing that. You've got people living in a park half a mile down from where it was leaking going, oh my gosh. I remember it being that summer and we were in that park and we were doing this and we had family over. I mean, so people are looking at documents thinking, where was I when these happened? And I mean, they know that the opportunity to protect them wasn't there. And frankly, they're sick. It didn't have to be this way.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that's clearly been going on for a long time. And I think some of the listeners, not just you, Dawn, want to get in on this conversation. And right now we have a call from Jerry. Jerry is calling from O'Fallon, Missouri right now. Jerry, you're on St. Louis on the Air. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I have a question. My street in Ferguson ended at a small park that bordered on Maylene Creek, which has the same source at Lambert Fields. And I know Coldwater has been well known publicly for at least 20 years or so. I don't know if any of that, if you had any evidence of contamination. I had two cancers that were linked to either radioactive or heavy metal toxins. And on the short street I grew up on, there were three guys about my age that all died between like 30 and 45 of I think two were brain cancer, and the third was another kind of obscure type of cancer. So I wondered if that's, as I say, it's the same source at Lambert, and I think it goes through North County, ultimately through Spanish Lake, and I think into the Mississippi, but it's the same source.
Well, first of all, I'm just so sorry. I mean, I can't imagine how you feel today. But I will tell you that, we're talking about documents that talk about water runoff, but water runs off of sites from different directions. Maylene Creek is something we've been concerned about and have wanted. And I think now we have reason to go out and test. But I think it's very important you understand that some of these documents detail windblown. And you certainly, where you're describing where you lived, would have been downwind of the airport. We do have evidence in these documents of the wind blowing this onto roofs at these sites, and the Army Corps having to come out because there was heavy radioactive waste in the tar of the roofing shingles that they then had to take off. So please get in touch with me. I'd love to speak with you more.
I will get your information from the website. Thank you.
Jerry, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to talk about the amount of time it's taking to clean things up at Westlake Landfill. It seems like it's been very slow. We're talking about something that was known by the federal government from back as far back as 1949. And the cleanup of these sites at Weldon Springs and near the airport in Coldwater Creek seems like it's really slow. What's it going to take? And I guess I'll ask this question both to Dawn and to Allison. What do you think it'll take for this cleanup to actually get done expeditiously now that some more spotlight has been put on this?
I think this is what it takes. I think we have evidence in these documents that the federal government knew it was illegally dumped before they have said. And I think that, again, they did not watch. This person that purchased the waste had to have a license. There was a lot of funny business that the government did overseeing their license when they had this waste at Laddie Avenue that led to it being illegally dumped at Westlake. So as far as I'm concerned, they need to pay for the whole cleanup at Westlake. Deal done. And they really need to get out there and do it. They know what they need to do. We're hoping that this is what it takes and what happens.
Allison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that this story kind of has over the years ebbed and flowed where, for example, a few years ago when you had the emergence of the fire at the Bridgeton landfill, there was a lot of coverage for a while and then it'll periodically quiet down. I'm hoping that we've been able to contribute to some sense of urgency about getting these sites cleaned up. I certainly think that the attention from state and federal lawmakers who, along with Dawn last week, called on the Department of Energy to fund this cleanup and get it done, at least the engineering done to prepare for the cleanup within the next 5 years. So I'm hopeful that adds some sense of urgency here.
And with just about 30 seconds left, Allison, you wrote another story that published yesterday. The headline for that story was Missouri wanted feds in 2021 or warned in 2021 that radioactive contamination of groundwater was not improving. What is the takeaway from that story that you wrote?
Sure. I think the takeaway from that story is that the Weldon Spring containment cell is something that we still have to keep an eye on. I think it's easy to write that site off as not a problem anymore because it looks like it's been, and it has been contained, but the groundwater has just been monitored. And so that's something that we have to keep an eye on.
And very quickly, again, as a reporter, and this might be beyond your purview, but with climate change, and we're 1 year away, I think this week, if not next week, from the 11 inches of rain in 24 hours that fell in the St. Louis area. And we also recently just had another huge rain event. Is there any sense of urgency, again, with climate change that you are seeing or that you found through your investigation on the officials to try to get some of this solved, because it's projected that things are going to get worse and worse, especially at the landfill?
That's a great question. I have not seen a ton of evidence that federal officials are looking at that. That doesn't mean that they're not. Mm-hmm. I know that they've gotten concerns from activists about, do you have a plan for if a tornado blows through? Do you have a plan for flood runoff? So right. I'm hoping that that's something that they've looked at.
That was Allison Kite. She's a reporter with the Missouri Independent, and we've been speaking as well with Dawn Chapman. She's the co-founder of the activist group Just Moms STL. Thank you very much, both of you, for being with us here today.
Today's segment was produced by Aula Kuziz,
with audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.